The train lurched to a grinding halt, just as the first vicious gust of wind threw snow against the windows with such force that Zelda Wright thought the glass might shatter. She pressed one gloved hand against the cold pane and peered out into the whiteness, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized this blizzard was unlike anything she had ever seen back in Boston. The conductor's voice rang through the passenger car, announcing they had reached Albuquerque, New Mexico, though the storm had delayed them by nearly 6 hours. Zelda gathered her carpet bag and small trunk, smoothing down the dove-gray traveling dress she had worn for 3 days straight, and tried to calm the wild flutter of nerves in her stomach. She was about to meet the man she had agreed to marry through letters alone, a cowboy named Thomas Tucker, who had written to her with such earnest sincerity that she had believed every word about his ranch, his dreams, and his desire for a wife to share his life. The platform was nearly deserted when she stepped down, the porter helping her with the trunk as snow swirled around them in dizzying spirals. The cold bit through her wool coat immediately, so different from the mild winter she had expected based on everything she had read about New Mexico. The station master had told her on the journey that this was an unusual storm, one that hit maybe once every 20 years in these parts, and her timing could not have been worse. She stood there shivering, scanning the platform for a tall man with dark hair and blue eyes, the description Thomas had given her in his letters. Minutes stretched into an eternity as other passengers hurried past her toward waiting carriages or into the station house. The wind howled like something alive and angry, and Zelda felt the first real stab of fear pierce through her carefully maintained composure. "Miss Wright." The voice came from behind her, deep and rough but not unkind. She turned to find a man approaching through the snow, his hat pulled low and his long coat dusted white. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and when he got close enough for her to see his face beneath the brim of that hat, she noticed his eyes were indeed blue, startlingly so against his weather-worn skin. But there was something else in those eyes, a wariness perhaps, or maybe just the same uncertainty she felt churning in her own gut. "I am Thomas Tucker. I apologize for not being right here waiting. The storm made the roads nearly impassable, and I had to stable my horse at the livery and come on foot." "Yes, I am Zelda Wright," she managed, her teeth starting to chatter. "The train was delayed quite significantly," he nodded, reaching for her trunk without hesitation. "The station master sent word ahead that you were on this train. I have been here for about 3 hours, waiting inside where it is warmer. We should get you out of this weather. I have secured a room for you at the hotel just across the square. It would not be proper for you to come straight out to the ranch, not until we are married, and in this storm, the ranch is not reachable anyway. The roads are buried under snow." Relief washed through her at his consideration for propriety, though she had known from his letters that Thomas was a decent man. They made their way across the plaza, leaning into the wind, and she was grateful when the warm interior of the hotel enveloped them. The lobby was small but clean, with a fire roaring in the stone fireplace. Thomas spoke briefly with the clerk, then turned to her with that same cautious expression. "Your room is ready. I have taken a room here as well, as I cannot get back to the ranch tonight. Perhaps tomorrow we might talk more, once you have rested from your journey. The storm should ease by morning, the locals say, though it will leave us with considerable snow to contend with." Zelda nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the past 3 days pressing down on her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I appreciate your thoughtfulness." "Thomas," he said quietly. "Please call me Thomas, and I will call you Zelda if that suits you." "It does," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Up close, She could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the way his hands were rough and scarred from hard work. He was handsome in a rugged way that was entirely different from the refined gentleman of Boston, and something about that appealed to her more than she had expected. "I will see you tomorrow then, Thomas." He tipped his hat to her, and she followed the clerk up the narrow staircase to her room. Once inside, she sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She had done it. She had traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger, leaving behind everything familiar because there had been nothing left for her in Boston. Her father had died 2 years ago, her mother 3 years before that, and the small inheritance had been swallowed by debts she had not known existed. Working as a seamstress had barely kept her fed, and when she had seen Thomas Tucker's advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper, something inside her had whispered that this was her chance at a new life. His letters had been honest and straightforward, describing a working ranch with cattle and horses, a modest house that needed a woman's touch, and a man who was 30 years old and tired of eating his own cooking and sleeping alone. He had not promised her luxury or excitement, but he had promised her respect, partnership, and the space to build something together. Now, lying in this hotel room while a blizzard raged outside, Zelda wondered if she had been a fool to come. But no, she told herself firmly. She was not a fool. She was brave, and she was choosing her own path forward, and tomorrow she would sit down with Thomas Tucker and see if the man matched the letters. Sleep came fitfully that night, with the wind rattling the windows and the cold seeping through the walls despite the small stove in the corner. She woke to pale gray light and an eerie silence. When she looked outside, the world had been transformed into something unrecognizable. Snow was piled against buildings in drifts that reached halfway up doorframes. The plaza was buried, and only a few hardy souls were out attempting to shovel paths. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a deep burgundy wool that she hoped made her look presentable, and pinned her dark blonde hair into a neat chignon. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman of 22 years with hazel eyes, a straight nose, and a determined set to her mouth that she had developed over the past few years of struggling alone. Breakfast was served in the hotel dining room, and Thomas was already there when she descended. He stood when he saw her, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Good morning. I hope you slept well despite the storm." "Well enough, thank you," she said, settling into the chair and accepting a cup of coffee from the serving girl. "The snow is quite something. I have never seen anything like it." "Neither have most folks around here," Thomas said, his gaze steady on her. "Albuquerque does not usually see storms like this. We get snow in the mountains, certainly, but down here in the valley, it is rare to get more than a dusting. This is exceptional and unfortunate timing for your arrival." They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, and Zelda appreciated that he did not fill every second with nervous chatter. She studied him more openly in the daylight streaming through the windows. He wore clean clothes, dark trousers and a blue shirt that brought out his eyes, and his dark hair was neatly combed back. His hands, wrapped around his coffee cup, were large and capable, and she found herself imagining those hands working with horses, mending fences, building the life he had described in his letters. "I suppose we should talk," Thomas said finally, setting down his cup. "About expectations and such. I know my letters laid out the basic facts, but now that you are here, I want to make sure we understand each other." "I would like that," Zelda said, meeting his directness with her own. "I will be honest with you, Thomas. I came here because I had nothing left in Boston. My parents are both gone, I had no siblings, and I was barely surviving on seamstress wages. Your advertisement spoke of a partnership, and that appealed to me more than the idea of slowly starving in a cold tenement. I do not come with romantic illusions, but I do come with a genuine desire to make a good life out here. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. I appreciate your honesty. I will give you the same. My ranch is a working operation, nothing fancy. I have about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and a house that is sturdy but plain. I work hard from sunup to sundown most days. I am not a wealthy man, but I provide well enough. I advertised for a wife because I am tired of being alone, tired of coming home to an empty house, tired of having no one to share the small victories and the hard days with. I want children someday if God wills it. I want someone who will stand beside me, not behind me. I want a true partner. That is what I want as well, Zelda said softly. I can cook and sew and manage a household. I'm not afraid of hard work. I grew up helping my mother run a boarding house before my father's business failed. I know how to stretch a dollar and make do, and I want children too someday. I want to build something that lasts. Thomas reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his palm. Then I think we might do well together, Zelda Wright. The question is, do you want to proceed with the marriage? Because if you have doubts, if you want to take the next train back to Boston, I will understand. I will even pay for your ticket. I do not want you to feel trapped. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Zelda felt a sudden swell of emotion in her chest. This man, this stranger, was giving her an out even though it would cost him money and leave him right back where he started. That told her more about his character than 100 letters could have. I do not want to go back to Boston, she said firmly. I want to stay. I want to marry you and see what kind of life we can build together. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, transforming his serious features into something warm and almost boyish. Then we will get married as soon as the preacher can do it. Probably in a few days, once the town digs itself out from this snow. In the meantime, we will stay here at the hotel, properly chaperoned, and get to know each other a bit better. Over the next 3 days, as Albuquerque slowly emerged from the snowstorm, Zelda and Thomas spent their time talking in the hotel lobby, taking short walks around the plaza as paths were cleared, and simply learning the rhythms of each other's presence. She discovered that he was a man of few words but deep feeling, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise, and that he listened to her with an attention that made her feel valued. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about moving to New Mexico territory 5 years ago to start his own operation, about the challenges of drought and cattle thieves, and the sheer hard work of making a living from the land. She told him about Boston, about her parents, about the grief that had nearly drowned her after her father's death, and about her determination to survive and find happiness again. On the 4th day, the sun came out in full force, turning the snow into blinding brilliance. The preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Howard, agreed to marry them that afternoon in the small church on the east side of the plaza. Zelda wore her best dress, a simple blue silk that she had made herself and saved for special occasions. Thomas wore a suit that was slightly too tight in the shoulders, and he confessed sheepishly that he had bought it 5 years ago and had clearly put on muscle since then. They stood before the altar with 2 witnesses, the hotel owner and his wife, and spoke their vows with steady voices. When Thomas slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Zelda felt the significance of the moment settle into her bones. She was married now, bound to this man, and they would face whatever came next together. The hotel owner had insisted on hosting a small wedding supper for them, and they ate roasted chicken and potatoes while the handful of guests toasted their happiness. Thomas was quieter than usual, and Zelda realized he was nervous. She was nervous too, her stomach fluttering with anticipation and a touch of fear about the wedding night to come. But when they finally retired to the room Thomas had reserved for them, he surprised her by sitting down in the chair by the window and saying, "We do not have to rush anything, Zelda. I know this is all very sudden and I want you to feel comfortable." She stood by the bed, her hands clasped together, and considered his words. This man, her husband, was trying so hard to do right by her. "I am nervous," she admitted, "but I am not afraid. I chose this, Thomas. I chose you." He rose and crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I chose you too," he said quietly. "When I got your first letter, with your honest words and your clear handwriting, I knew you were different from the others who had responded. You did not make promises you could not keep or paint yourself as something you were not. You were just yourself, and that was exactly what I wanted." "I did not expect this," Zelda whispered, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. "I did not expect to feel this way so quickly." "What way?" Thomas asked, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Like maybe this could be more than just a practical arrangement," she said. "Like maybe we could actually find happiness together." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she saw the flicker of something warm and tender in his eyes. "I think we will," he murmured. Then he bent his head and kissed her, slow and careful, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she did not want to. She leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric of his shirt. The kiss deepened, and she felt the flutter in her stomach transform into something warmer, something that spread through her whole body like honey. When they finally drew apart, both breathing a little harder, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "You are worth the wait," he said softly. "All those years of being alone, all those nights wondering if I would ever find someone to share my life with, you were worth every moment of waiting." The words unlocked something inside her, and Zelda felt tears prick at her eyes. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before." "Then they were fools," Thomas said firmly. He kissed her again, and this time there was more urgency, more heat. She responded in kind, her fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt as he carefully, reverently, began to unlace her dress. They came together with a mix of awkwardness and tenderness, learning each other's bodies in the lamplight, and Zelda discovered that this intimacy, this joining with another person, could be both vulnerable and powerful. Thomas was gentle with her, mindful of her inexperience, but there was passion too, a fire beneath his careful control that thrilled her. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Zelda felt more at peace than she had in years. Thomas's arm was around her, her head resting on his shoulder, and the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear was the most comforting sound she had ever heard. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" he asked, his voice drowsy. "For being exactly who you said you were in your letters," she said. "For being honest and kind and making me feel like I made the right choice coming here." His arm tightened around her. "You did make the right choice. We both did." They stayed one more night at the hotel, and the next morning they hired a wagon to take them out to Thomas's ranch. The snow was already starting to melt under the relentless New Mexico sun, turning the roads into muddy tracks that made the journey slow and uncomfortable. But Zelda did not mind. She was eager to see her new home, eager to start this new chapter of her life. The ranch was about 10 miles outside of town, nestled in a valley with low hills rising on either side. The house came into view first, a simple wooden structure with a porch across the front and smoke rising from the chimney. Thomas had ridden out the day before to get the fire going and make sure everything was ready. "It is not much," he said, his voice uncertain as he helped her down from the wagon. "But it is solid and it is ours." Zelda looked at the house, at the barn and corrals behind it, at the cattle grazing in the distance, and felt something swell in her chest. "It is perfect," she said, and meant it. This was not Boston, with its crowded streets and tall buildings and constant noise. This was wide, open space and clean air and a chance to build something from the ground up. This was freedom. Thomas carried her trunk inside and Zelda followed, taking in every detail. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. There was a cast iron stove, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a worn sofa facing the fireplace, and shelves lined with books and supplies. A short hallway led to 2 bedrooms, one slightly larger than the other, and Thomas had clearly made an effort to clean and tidy before her arrival. The larger bedroom held a double bed with a simple quilt, a wardrobe, and a washstand. It was sparse but clean, and Zelda could already imagine how she would add touches to make it feel more like home. "I know it needs a woman's touch," Thomas said, standing in the doorway looking almost apologetic. "I never was much good at making a place feel homey." "It has good bones," Zelda said, running her hand along the solid bed frame. "And I have plenty of ideas for how to improve it. But Thomas, it is already more than I had in Boston. I had one room with a leaky roof and walls so thin I could hear every conversation from the neighboring apartments. This is a palace in comparison." He looked relieved, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I am glad you think so. Now, I should warn you, ranch life is not easy. I will be up before dawn most mornings to tend the animals and check the fences. There is always something that needs fixing or attention. But I will help you with the heavy chores around the house when I can, and I will teach you about the ranch work if you are interested." "I am interested in all of it," Zelda said firmly. "I want to be a true partner, Thomas. That means understanding what you do and how the ranch operates. I'm not afraid of learning new things." Over the following weeks, Zelda threw herself into her new life with determination. She learned to cook on the wood stove, mastering the temperamental beast through trial and error. She learned to bake bread from scratch, to preserve vegetables, to make soap and candles. She sewed curtains for the windows and cushions for the sofa, using fabric she bought on a trip into town. She planted a vegetable garden in the patch of earth. Thomas helped her turn over behind the house, even though it was early in the season and she would have to protect the tender seedlings from any late frosts. And slowly, steadily, the house began to transform from a bachelor's dwelling into a home. But Zelda did not stop there. True to her word, she asked Thomas to teach her about the ranch work. He was surprised at first, but he honored her request. He taught her how to ride, putting her on his most gentle mare and patiently correcting her posture and grip on the reins. He taught her how to recognize when a cow was about to calve, how to check for signs of illness in the livestock, how to mend a broken fence post. She had never worked so hard in her life, and yet she had never felt so alive. Her hands became calloused, her skin tanned despite the bonnet she wore, and her muscles grew stronger. She fell into bed exhausted every night, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from honest labor and accomplishment. And through it all, her relationship with Thomas deepened. They talked as they worked, sharing stories and dreams and opinions. She discovered that he loved to read, that he had a whole shelf of books ranging from agricultural manuals to adventure novels to poetry. She read to him sometimes in the evenings while he mended tack or sharpened tools, and those quiet hours became some of her favorite. They laughed together, argued occasionally about minor things like whether to plant corn or beans in the south field, and supported each other through the daily challenges of ranch life. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they came together with increasing ease and passion, learning what pleased each other, building an intimacy that went beyond the physical. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch thrived. The cattle fattened on good grass. Several cows gave birth to healthy calves, and Thomas was able to sell a small herd at a good price in town. He came home from that trip with a bolt of beautiful cotton fabric for Zelda and a new bridle for his favorite horse, grinning like a boy as he presented her with the gift. "I know it is not fancy," he said, "but I saw it and thought of you." "It is lovely," Zelda said, running her fingers over the soft floral print. "I will make myself a new dress for church." She had been attending Sunday services with Thomas, and the community had welcomed her warmly. There were not many women in this area, and the ranchers' wives had been eager to befriend her, inviting her to quilting bays and church socials. She was building a network of friends, a support system, and it made her feel even more rooted in this new place. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, Zelda realized she had not thought about Boston in weeks. Her old life felt like a distant dream, something that had happened to someone else. This was her life now, this ranch, this man beside her, this vast sky overhead. "Thomas," she said softly, reaching for his hand, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," she assured him. "Quite the opposite. I just realized that I am happy. Truly happy in a way I have not been since I was a child, and I wanted you to know that, wanted to thank you for giving me this life." His expression softened, and he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You gave me this life too, Zelda. This house feels like a home now because you are in it. I look forward to coming in from the fields because I know you will be here. You have made everything better just by being here." "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. They had not spoken of love yet, both of them perhaps too cautious or too practical to voice it, but Zelda could not hold it in any longer. She loved this man, loved his strength and his kindness, loved the way he treated her as an equal, loved the life they were building together. Thomas's eyes widened slightly, and then his whole face lit up with joy. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I have loved you since that first night at the hotel, when you stood there shivering in the snow and still managed to look brave and determined. I love your strength, your intelligence, your willingness to try new things. I love who I am when I am with you." They kissed then, deep and slow, and when they finally drew apart, both of them were smiling. "We should celebrate," Thomas said. "Tomorrow is Saturday. What do you say we ride into town, have dinner at the hotel, maybe even dance if there is music?" "I would like that very much," Zelda said. It would be their first real outing as a couple beyond church and necessary shopping trips. She felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect. The next day, they dressed in their best clothes and rode into Albuquerque together, Zelda riding her mare with confidence now after months of practice. The town was bustling, ranchers and their families coming in for the weekend, and the hotel dining room was crowded. They found a table in the corner and ordered steak and potatoes, indulging in the luxury of someone else's cooking. Afterward, they walked around the plaza, and Thomas bought her a stick of peppermint candy from the general store, teasing her about her sweet tooth. There was indeed music that evening, a traveling musician with a fiddle setting up in the hotel saloon. And though Zelda had never been much of a dancer, she let Thomas lead her through several simple reels and waltzes. He was not particularly graceful, but neither was she, and they laughed at their own missteps, not caring what anyone else thought. As they rode home under the stars, Zelda felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. She had not known it was possible to feel this way, to be this happy. She leaned against Thomas's shoulder, his arm around her waist to steady her on the horse they were sharing for the ride back, her mare trailing behind on a lead rope. "Thank you for a wonderful day," she murmured. "Thank you for saying yes to a stranger's advertisement in a newspaper," he replied. "Best decision I ever made, placing that advertisement. Second best decision was choosing you out of all the women who responded." Summer blazed on, hot and dry, and Zelda learned to cope with the heat, adapting her schedule to work in the early morning and late evening when it was cooler. She helped Thomas move the cattle to higher pastures where the grass was better, riding alongside him for hours and learning to use her rope to guide stubborn cows. She took pride in her growing skills, in the way Thomas relied on her as a true partner rather than just a homemaker. They worked together seamlessly now, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with looks and gestures as much as with words. In August, Zelda missed her monthly courses. She did not think much of it at first, attributing it to the heat and the hard work. But when another month passed with no sign, she began to suspect. She waited another 2 weeks to be certain, and then one evening as they were cleaning up after dinner, she turned to Thomas and said, "I think I might be with child." He dropped the plate he was drying and it clattered into the wash basin, miraculously not breaking. "What? Are you certain?" "Not entirely, but fairly certain," she said, her heart pounding. She had not been sure how he would react, whether he would be pleased or worried. "I have missed 2 monthly courses, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings." Thomas crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." Relief and joy flooded through her, and she laughed, holding on to him tightly. "You are pleased, then?" "Pleased, I am thrilled," he said, setting her down gently as if she were suddenly made of glass. "This is everything I wanted, Zelda. A wife, a home, a family. You have given me everything." "We made this together," she corrected gently. "This baby is ours, Thomas, our creation, our future." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining. "I will take care of you both, I promise. Whatever you need, whatever I have to do, I will make sure you and this baby are safe and healthy." "I know you will," she said, covering his hands with hers, "and I will take care of us too. We are a team, remember." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Zelda did feel tired more easily and the morning sickness was unpleasant, but overall she felt well. Thomas became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy lifting or strenuous work. She had to remind him several times that she was pregnant, not ill, and that she was perfectly capable of continuing most of her usual activities. They compromised, with Zelda agreeing not to ride or do anything dangerous, and Thomas agreeing to let her continue with the household chores and light ranch work. They made a trip into town to see the doctor, who confirmed the pregnancy and estimated the baby would arrive sometime in March. The news spread quickly through their small community, and the ranchers' wives rallied around Zelda, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and promises to help when the time came. Mrs. Henderson, who lived on the neighboring ranch 3 miles away, became a particular friend. She had 4 children of her own and a wealth of practical knowledge that she shared generously. Zelda felt embraced by this community in a way she had never experienced in Boston, where neighbors had been strangers and everyone had kept to themselves. Winter came, milder than the freak blizzard that had greeted Zelda's arrival, but still cold enough to require careful planning. Thomas made sure they had plenty of firewood stacked and food stored. He insulated the windows with extra fabric and made sure the barn was secure for the horses and the few cattle he had kept close to the house. Zelda spent the short, cold days sewing baby clothes and blankets, her hands busy while her mind wandered to thoughts of the future. She imagined a little boy with Thomas's blue eyes, or a little girl with her hazel ones. She imagined teaching a child to read, to ride, to love this land as she had come to love it. On a particularly cold January evening, as they sat by the fire, Thomas suddenly said, "What if something goes wrong?" Zelda looked up from her sewing, surprised by the question. "What do you mean, with the birth?" he said, his voice tight with worry. "Women die in childbirth, Zelda. I have seen it happen. What if something goes wrong and I lose you?" She set aside her sewing and moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. "You cannot think like that," she said gently. "Yes, there is always risk, but I am young and healthy and strong. We have a good doctor in town, and Mrs. Henderson has promised to come stay with us when my time is near. We have done everything we can to prepare." "I cannot lose you," Thomas said roughly, pulling her close. "You are everything to me, Zelda. If something happened to you, I do not know what I would do." "Nothing is going to happen," she said firmly, even though a small part of her shared his fear. "I am going to have this baby, and we are going to raise him or her together, and we are going to grow old on this ranch. That is the future we are choosing, Thomas. We have to believe in it." He pressed his face into her hair, and she felt the tension slowly drain from his body. "You are right. I am sorry, I just worry." "I know," she said softly, "but worrying will not change anything. We just have to have faith." March arrived with warmer weather and the first signs of spring. Zelda's belly was round and prominent now, the baby active and strong. She could feel little feet kicking against her ribs, could watch her stomach shift and ripple as the baby moved. Thomas was fascinated by it, often placing his hand on her belly to feel the movement, his face full of wonder every time. Mrs. Henderson came to stay with them in early March, and it was a good thing she did, because Zelda went into labor only 2 days later, 3 weeks earlier than the doctor had estimated. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Thomas paced the main room like a caged animal, forbidden from the bedroom by Mrs. Henderson, who ruled the birthing room with calm efficiency. He could hear Zelda's cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He had faced down charging bulls, broken wild horses, and survived harsh winters, but nothing had ever terrified him as much as the sounds coming from that bedroom. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he heard a different sound, the thin, wailing cry of a newborn baby. He froze, his heart in his throat, waiting. A moment later, Mrs. Henderson emerged, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said, "a healthy baby boy, and your wife is tired but doing well." Thomas felt his knees go weak with relief. "Can I see them?" "Give me a moment to get them cleaned up and settled," Mrs. Henderson said. "Then yes, you can come in." 5 minutes later, Thomas entered the bedroom to find Zelda propped up against the pillows, her face pale and exhausted but radiant with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. He approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were squeezed shut. He was the most beautiful thing Thomas had ever seen next to his wife. "Look what we made," Zelda said softly, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Is he not perfect?" "He is perfect," Thomas agreed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "And so are you. You are so strong, Zelda." "I am in awe of you." "I was so scared," she admitted. "But Mrs. Henderson talked me through it, And I kept thinking about you, about our future, about how this baby was the culmination of everything we have been building together. That gave me the strength to keep going." Thomas reached out a tentative finger, and the baby's tiny hand reflexively grasped it. The grip was surprisingly strong, and Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Hello, son," he said quietly. "I am your father, and I promise to protect you and love you and teach you everything I know." "What should we name him?" Zelda asked. "We talked about names, but we never decided." "I was thinking about my father," Thomas said. "His name was Theodore. We could call the baby Teddy." "Theodore Tucker," Zelda said, testing the name. "Teddy Tucker, I like it. It suits him." "Theodore it is then," Thomas said, leaning forward to kiss Zelda's forehead. "Thank you for giving me a son. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for being you." "Thank you for finding me," Zelda replied, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Thank you for placing that advertisement, for waiting for me in a snowstorm, for telling me I was worth the wait. This life we have built together, this family, this is everything I never knew I needed. Mrs. Henderson stayed for a week, helping Zelda recover and teaching her how to care for the baby. Teddy was a good baby, fussy only when he was hungry or needed changing. He had Thomas's blue eyes, which delighted his father to no end, and Zelda's nose. He nursed well and gained weight steadily, and by the time Mrs. Henderson left, Zelda felt confident in her ability to manage. Those first few months with a newborn were exhausting but joyful. Thomas took over more of the household chores, so Zelda could rest between feedings, and he was surprisingly adept at soothing the baby when he fussed. Zelda would wake in the night to find Thomas pacing the floor with Teddy against his shoulder, murmuring to him about cattle and horses and the ranch, and her heart would overflow with love for both of them. As Teddy grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Thomas hired a young man named Miguel to help with the heavy work, giving him more time to spend with his family. They built an addition onto the house, adding a proper nursery for Teddy and a larger bedroom for themselves. Zelda's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables all summer, and she learned to preserve enough to last through the winter. They went into town for church and social events, always as a family, and Teddy was doted on by everyone in the community. On a warm evening in late summer, when Teddy was 6 months old and starting to sit up on his own, Zelda and Thomas sat on the porch watching him play with a wooden rattle that Thomas had carved. "Can you believe it has been almost 2 years since I arrived?" Zelda said, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. "It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet it also feels like yesterday. I remember seeing you on that platform, shivering in the snow, looking so determined and so vulnerable at the same time," Thomas said. "I thought you were the bravest woman I had ever met, traveling all that way to marry a stranger." "I was terrified," Zelda admitted, "but I was also desperate for a change, for a chance at something better. I never imagined it would be this good, though. I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "I placed that advertisement because I was practical, because I needed help on the ranch and wanted a family. But somewhere along the way, it became so much more than that. You became so much more than that. You are my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. And you are mine," Zelda said, tilting her face up for a kiss. "I love you, Thomas Tucker. I love the life we have built, the family we have created. I love waking up every morning knowing that this is real, that this is forever." "Forever," Thomas agreed, kissing her thoroughly. Teddy made a happy gurgling sound as if in agreement, and they both laughed. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Teddy grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere and peppered him with endless questions. When he was 3, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, She felt more prepared, less anxious, though Thomas was just as worried as he had been the first time. Their second child, a daughter they named Teresa after Zelda's mother, arrived in the spring without complications. She had dark blonde hair like her mother, and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. With 2 children, the house felt full and lively. Zelda taught Teddy his letters and numbers, reading to both children every evening before bed. Thomas taught Teddy to ride, putting him on a gentle pony and leading him around the corral. They went on picnics down by the creek, attended church socials and town celebrations, and hosted gatherings for their neighbors. The ranch continued to grow and thrive, allowing them a comfortable life if not a wealthy one, when Teddy was 7 and Teresa was 4. Zelda realized she was pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder, with more fatigue and sickness, and she was older now at 30 years old. The doctor advised caution and rest, which frustrated Zelda, but she complied for the sake of the baby. Thomas hired a woman from town to help with the housework and the children, and he hovered over Zelda constantly, making her laugh with his overprotectiveness. Their 3rd child, another boy they named Timothy, arrived in the fall. He was a big baby and the birth was difficult, leaving Zelda weak and exhausted. For several weeks afterward, she struggled to recover, and Thomas was genuinely frightened that he might lose her. But slowly, with rest and good food and the doctor's care, she regained her strength. When she was finally well enough to resume her normal activities, Thomas sat her down and said, "No more babies. I cannot go through that again, Zelda. I nearly lost you this time." "I think 3 is enough," Zelda agreed, still feeling the effects of the difficult birth. "We have 2 sons and a daughter. We are blessed, Thomas. We do not need to tempt fate." As the children grew, the ranch became a family operation. Teddy was a natural with the horses and cattle, showing the same love for ranch work that his father had. Teresa preferred helping her mother in the house and garden, but she also had a gift for numbers and helped keep the ranch accounts as she got older. Timothy was the most adventurous of the 3, always climbing trees and exploring the hills, keeping his parents constantly on their toes. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard years when drought affected the grass and they had to sell off part of the herd. There were good years when rainfall was plentiful and cattle prices were high. There were illnesses and injuries, celebrations and sorrows. Through it all, Zelda and Thomas stood together, their love deepening with every shared experience. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Zelda into town for dinner, leaving the children with Miguel and his wife who lived in a small house they had built on the property. They ate at the hotel where they had spent their first days together, and afterward, Thomas led her outside to the plaza. It was winter again, but a mild one with no snow in sight. "You remember the night we met?" Thomas asked, pulling her close as they stood in the same spot where he had first found her waiting on the platform. "The snowstorm, your arrival, how uncertain everything was." "I remember every detail," Zelda said, resting her head against his chest. "I remember being so cold and so scared and so hopeful all at once. I remember seeing you come through the snow and thinking you looked like exactly what you were, a good man trying to do his best." "I told you that night that you were worth the wait," Thomas said softly. "I meant it then, and I mean it even more now. Every day with you has been a gift, Zelda. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. You have made my life fuller and richer than I ever dreamed possible." "You gave me a life when I had nothing," Zelda replied, tears gathering in her eyes. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, Thomas. I would get on that train and come to you through 100 snowstorms if that was what it took." They kissed there in the plaza, under the winter stars, and Zelda felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt on their wedding night all those years ago. This man, her husband, her partner, the father of her children, was still capable of making her feel young and loved and cherished. The children grew into young adults, each finding their own path. Teddy took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a keen understanding of both the livestock and the business side of things. He married a local girl, the daughter of another rancher, and they built a house on the far edge of the Tucker property. Teresa, brilliant with numbers and organization, helped expand the ranch's operations, negotiating better prices for their cattle and investing wisely in land and equipment. She eventually married a banker from Albuquerque, a kind man who respected her intelligence and supported her continued involvement in the family ranch. Timothy, true to his adventurous nature, spent several years working on other ranches and even tried his hand at mining before eventually returning home and settling down with a schoolteacher from town. As grandchildren arrived, Zelda and Thomas found new joy in watching the next generation grow. They moved into the smaller house that Miguel had vacated when he retired and moved to live with his daughter in town, giving the main house to Teddy and his growing family. But they were still active and involved, still riding out to check the herds, still participating in the daily life of the ranch. On a spring evening, 25 years after Zelda had arrived in Albuquerque, she and Thomas sat on the porch of their small house watching the sun set. They were both 55 now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined with years of sun and wind and laughter. But they were still strong, still healthy, still deeply in love. "I was thinking today about that first year," Zelda said, her hand clasped in Thomas's. "About how hard I worked to prove myself, to show you that I could be a true partner on this ranch." "You never had to prove anything," Thomas said. "I saw your worth from the beginning." "But I needed to prove it to myself," Zelda said. "I needed to know that I was capable, that I could thrive out here. And I did, Thomas. We did. Look at what we built together." They looked out over the land at the house where their son lived with his wife and children, at the barns and corrals, at the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. They could see Teresa's house on the next hill over, smoke rising from the chimney. They could hear the distant shouts of grandchildren playing. This ranch, this legacy, was the culmination of 25 years of hard work, partnership, and love. "I have no regrets," Thomas said quietly. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every hard day, every sacrifice, it was all worth it to have this life with you." "I have no regrets either," Zelda said. "Coming here was the best decision I ever made. You were the best decision I ever made." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, they sat in comfortable silence. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and activity, the product of their labor and their love. Their children were settled and happy, their grandchildren were healthy and thriving, and they had each other still, after all these years. "You know what I remember most about that first night," Thomas said suddenly, "when I found you on the platform in the snowstorm." "What?" Zelda asked, turning to look at him. "The way you stood there, refusing to show weakness even though you were clearly freezing and exhausted," he said. "The way you looked me straight in the eye when you introduced yourself. The way you held your head high despite being in a completely unfamiliar place. That was when I knew you were strong enough for this life, strong enough to be my partner." "And do you know what I remember most?" Zelda asked. "The way you apologized for not being right there waiting, even though the storm was not your fault. The way you immediately thought about my comfort and propriety, getting me a hotel room. The way you looked at me like you actually saw me, not just a solution to your problem. That was when I knew you were a good man, Thomas Tucker. We saw each other truly from the beginning, Thomas said. That is our secret, I think. We never tried to be anything other than who we were. And we fell in love anyway, Zelda said softly, or maybe because of it. Definitely because of it, Thomas agreed, pulling her close. I loved you for exactly who you were, mail-order bride who arrived in a snowstorm. And I love you still, Zelda Tucker, wife, mother, grandmother, partner, and love of my life. And I love you, Zelda whispered. Always and forever, my cowboy who said I was worth the wait. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear overhead, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of blooming wildflowers. From the main house, they could hear the sounds of their family settling in for the evening. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in its simplicity, and yet it contained everything that mattered. Love, family, contentment, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived together. Years continued to pass in peaceful succession. Thomas and Zelda remained active well into their 60s, though they left more of the hard physical work to their children and the hired hands. They took pleasure in their grandchildren, teaching them the same lessons they had taught their own children about hard work, honesty, and the value of the land. They traveled occasionally, taking the train to visit Teresa and her family in Albuquerque proper, or going to see Timothy at his ranch 2 counties over. But they always returned home to their little house on the property, to the land that had become as much a part of them as their own heartbeats. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. The main house was bursting with people, 3 generations of Tuckers and their spouses and children. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point, Teddy stood up and raised his glass in a toast. To my parents, he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, who showed me what it means to be a true partner to someone, what it means to work hard for what you want, and what it means to build something that lasts. This ranch, this family, is their legacy. And we are all better for having them as our example. Everyone cheered and drank, and Zelda felt tears stream down her face. Thomas squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the family had gone home, they sat together on the porch once more, their favorite spot, their refuge. 30 years, Zelda marveled. How did that happen? It feels like we just got married yesterday. Time flies when you are happy, Thomas said. And I have been happy every day with you, Zelda. Even the hard days, she teased. Even when the drought killed half the herd. Even when Timothy broke his arm falling out of that tree. Even when I burned dinner and we had to eat bread and jam, especially those days, Thomas said seriously. Because on those days, I knew I had you beside me to face whatever came. That made all the difference. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky. The stars were brilliant out here, away from any town lights, and they never tired of looking at them. Zelda thought about the young woman she had been, stepping off that train into a snowstorm, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. She thought about everything that had happened since, all the moments both big and small that had woven together to create this tapestry of a life. And she felt nothing but gratitude. I wonder what would have happened if I had not seen your advertisement, she said quietly. If I had chosen a different man or stayed in Boston or given up entirely. I try not to think about that, Thomas admitted. It is too awful to contemplate. My life without you in it would have been gray and empty, Zelda. You brought color and warmth and joy. You brought everything that matters. We brought it to each other, she corrected. It was never one-sided, Thomas. You gave me just as much as I gave you. Then we are fortunate indeed, he said, to have found each other against all odds. A mail-order bride and a lonely cowboy brought together by a newspaper advertisement and a snowstorm. The best snowstorm that ever happened, Zelda said with a smile. The best snowstorm, Thomas agreed, kissing her temple. And the best decision I ever made, writing that advertisement, second only to choosing you when you responded. They grew old together gracefully, their love never diminishing even as their bodies slowed and their hair went completely white. Thomas still called Zelda beautiful, and she still blushed like a young bride when he did. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other good morning and good night, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Their children and grandchildren often commented on how rare it was to see a couple so devoted after so many years, and Zelda and Thomas would exchange knowing glances, sharing the secret that was not really a secret at all. That love was a choice you made every day, that partnership was built through honesty and respect, and that happiness was found in the simple moments shared with someone who truly understood you. As they entered their 70s, they slowed down considerably. Thomas's knees bothered him, legacy of decades of hard physical labor. Zelda's hands grew arthritic, making sewing and fine handwork difficult. But they adapted, found new ways to contribute, new pleasures to pursue. Thomas taught his grandsons everything he knew about ranching, passing on the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime. Zelda helped her granddaughters learn to cook and sew and manage a household, sharing recipes and techniques. They read together in the evenings, took slow walks around the property, and spent hours on their porch watching the world go by. One autumn evening, when they were both 72, Thomas looked at Zelda and said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" she asked, setting aside her knitting. "About legacy," he said thoughtfully. "About what we will leave behind when we are gone, and I realized that it is not just this ranch as much as that matters. It is the example we set, the way we loved each other and our children, the way we built something together from nothing. That is what will last, Zelda. That is what our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will remember and hopefully emulate." "That is a beautiful thought," Zelda said softly. "And you are right. We have shown them what is possible when two people commit to each other fully, when they work together toward a common goal, when they choose love every single day even when it is hard." "Especially when it is hard," Thomas said. "Anyone can love during the easy times. It is the hard times that test you, that show what you are really made of. And we passed those tests, you and I. We came through stronger." "We did," Zelda agreed. "And I would not change a single thing about our life together, Thomas. Not one moment, not one choice. It has been exactly what I needed, exactly what I wanted, even when I did not know that was what I wanted." As the years advanced into their mid-70s, both Thomas and Zelda remained remarkably healthy and sharp-minded, a testament to their active lifestyle and strong constitutions. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with another huge family gathering, this time including great-grandchildren who ran around underfoot, filling the house with noise and laughter. 50 years since that snowy day when they had stood before Reverend Howard and promised to love and cherish each other. 50 years of keeping that promise, of building a life and a family, and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. During the anniversary celebration, Teresa stood and gave a speech about her parents, talking about how they had taught her that women could be strong and capable, that partnerships should be equal, that love was shown through actions as much as words. Teddy spoke about the work ethic and integrity his father had modeled, and how his mother had taught him that gentleness and strength were not mutually exclusive. Timothy, always the emotional one, simply said that his parents had given him the best possible foundation for his own life, and he hoped to honor them by passing those same values to his own children. When it was their turn to speak, Thomas and Zelda stood together, his arm around her waist, and Thomas said simply, "All we ever tried to do was love each other well and raise our children right. If we succeeded in that, then we succeeded in everything that matters. Thank you all for being here, for being part of our story, for carrying it forward into the future." Zelda added, "I came to New Mexico as a mail-order bride, a woman with nothing to her name but a carpet bag and a willingness to try. Thomas took a chance on me, and together we built all of this. Remember that when things get hard in your own lives. Remember that with love, with work, with dedication, anything is possible." The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Zelda and Thomas smiled at each other, 50 years of shared history in that single look. They lived peacefully for several more years, watching their great-grandchildren grow, enjoying the fruits of their labor, and cherishing each day they had together. Thomas passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 78, his hand clasped in Zelda's. She grieved him deeply but without bitterness, grateful for every moment they had shared. She lived for 2 more years, surrounded by her family, still sharp and engaged with the world until the very end. When she died at 80, her children found a letter she had written to be read at her funeral. In it, she wrote, "I came to New Mexico on a train through a snowstorm to marry a man I had never met. I was terrified and hopeful and determined to make a new life. Thomas Tucker met me on that platform and told me I was worth the wait, and those words sustained me through every challenge we faced together. He kept his promise, and I kept mine. We loved each other well. We raised good children. We built something that will last long after we are gone. I die with no regrets, only gratitude for a life fully lived and love fully shared. Tell my story to your children and their children. Tell them that love is a choice, partnership is a gift, and happiness is found in the everyday moments shared with someone who sees you truly. Tell them that a mail-order bride and a cowboy built an empire of the heart, and that empire lives on in all of you." The letter was read at her funeral, which was attended by over 100 people, 3 generations of family and friends whose lives had been touched by Thomas and Zelda Tucker. They buried her beside Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could rest together with a view of everything they had built. On the shared headstone their children had carved, "Thomas and Zelda Tucker, partners in life, love, and legacy, forever together." The ranch continued to thrive under the management of Teddy and his children, and then his grandchildren. Teresa's financial acumen ensured the family's prosperity through wise investments and careful management. Timothy's adventurous spirit led to expansions and innovations that kept the ranch competitive in changing times. But more than the land or the cattle or the money, the Tucker family passed down the story of Thomas and Zelda, of how a mail-order bride arrived in a snowstorm, and a cowboy said she was worth the wait, and how from that unlikely beginning grew a love story that spanned 50 years and touched countless lives. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch where Thomas and Zelda had spent so many evenings, and they would look out over the land and feel the presence of those 2 people who had started it all. They would remember the lessons taught, the example set, the love shared. And they would understand that what Thomas and Zelda had built was not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love, partnership, and dedication that would endure for generations to come. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived in a snowstorm and the cowboy who declared her worth the wait became a family legend, told and retold, embellished and cherished. It was a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle, and that two people committed to each other could build something that would outlast them both. It was a story of the Wild West, of hard work and harsh conditions, but more than that, it was a story of the human heart and its capacity for love, growth, and lasting connection. And in that way, it was a story that would never end, living on forever in the hearts and memories of all who came after, a testament to the power of choosing love, choosing partnership, and choosing to build something beautiful together.